welcome to episode 13 of the Philosopod. It's probably not the morning, it is in the morning.
Nice one. Good start.
My name's James, and with me today we have...
Kane.
Beth.
Kyle.
Bryn. Gareth.
The Senate. Fibbly. Ash. Fibbly.
Connor.
It's Finn, in case you missed that. Today we're going to be talking about utilitarianism. So does anyone have any input on what they think utilitarianism means? And I know Gareth already knows, so we'll let someone else.
Something to do with utility.
Utility is part of it. Yeah.
That's the best I got.
Anyone?
Things should be in the best interest of utility.
I told you in like 5
No
minutes.
matter what you do, it should maximise utility.
I told you as well.
Well,
I was about to explain.
Let Finn explain.
Okay.
That's like if you kill 2 people instead of 50.
Yeah, that's basically utilitarianism.
It's for
The greater good.
yeah.
So one for all instead of all for one.
Yeah.
In a
I
way.
know the situation
In a way.
you're going to end up bringing up.
No, you're wrong.
What the troll
I'm
problem.
not.
Vsauce.
No, this is what I said. Everyone fine.
Last week was so
good.
Yeah, it's sort of gone downhill from here. But a philosopher by the name of Bentham proposes act utilitarianism. Excuse me. What were you whispering there?
Oh, no, I've said nothing.
James,
Right,
just repeat that again.
A philosopher by the name of Bentham, he is an act utilitarianism, and act utilitarians believe that pleasure is the highest goal for humans. And Bentham proposes this thing called hedonic calculus, which he uses to calculate utility, or happiness, caused by an act. And there are 7 categories within this calculus, and that's intensity, duration, certainty, remoteness, fecundity, purity, and extent. Fecundity meaning, which means the pleasure will lead to other pleasures. So basically, calculating how good of a pleasure this is of an act. Are you laughing at the word pleasure, or are you laughing at the word fecundity?
No, I'm not laughing.
Okay.
And they don't know that.
So, do you see any problems with using this? So basically the idea is, if you're presented with a situation, you choose the thing that provides the most happiness.
If there are a lot of people that have done something wrong, and then one person's done something right, but then it's like, is it too early to bring up the tram things? That's
No,
the
it's
best way
fine,
of
it's
putting
still-
it.
What if
Right,
the
so-
things that makes people happy is immoral?
Yeah, but then who determines the morality? Who determines that moral action is wrong?
Whether you like it or not, there's
You
morality,
see,
there's immorality.
Yeah, but that's dependent on what side of the world you live in. and
For
what
example,
country.
if
Culture determines our ideas of morality. For example, again, I'll bring up the idea of child marriage. But in Western civilization, typically,
would you
Judeo-Christian, that's
would you
it's
say
a
that
sin.
the majority
It's
of
not
the world
in some
like child marriage?
I would say it depends where you look. The majority of the world, I would say no, but that doesn't mean there is any such thing as definitive right and wrong.
Well,
It's influenced by culture.
It's funny you should say that, because a philosopher by the name of Mill tries to prove utilitarianism by saying that, well, if you see an object, or if you want to know if something's visible, you see it. So therefore he applies this to desirability. So if you want to know if something's desired, then you ask, is it desirable? And he says, well, everyone desires happiness, so therefore happiness is desirable. So he's saying a moral act is something which causes happiness.
But are we saying happiness? Because in my opinion, happiness is quite subjective in the idea that you could have happiness where you're making a decision with the belief that inevitably and eventually you will guarantee happiness to some people. However, I think that ignores the idea of each individual has a different idea of what happiness is.
Oh, definitely.
So are we saying happiness is survival, on basic survival, or are we saying happiness is extravagance? And I think that's kind of a...
Difference between living and life, what is it? Survival and living.
Survival and thriving.
It's like quality of life and standard of life. We're saying the basic necessities of
Mill
life.
provides sort of a hierarchy of said pleasures, he gives higher and lower pleasures. And he says that lower pleasures are something that are driven by our desires, like animals. So, like something that makes you happy, like if you eat something and it tastes good, and you're happy about that. And then he says that higher pleasures are more sort of, that require intellect and require the human's ability to reason. So, I don't know, a particularly difficult Sudoku puzzle.
Really pleasurable.
Yeah, just something that if you put effort in, you will get pleasure from it eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So he tries to get around that by saying that. However, there obviously are problems that you have highlighted, by which, like, the issues with utilitarianism is that it could lead to counterintuitive situations. So, for example, if you held someone captive and you looked after them and you made them very happy,
Sounds good.
utilitarianism would say that that's right, because you've produced happiness, you've kept them happy, you've kept them fed. But we would say that that is not morally right because we've held them captive.
But you could say, in keeping them captive, surely that to become happy they desire freedom, don't they? So to be happy they need freedom. So really you haven't guaranteed their happiness.
It's not about guarantee happiness, it's about the happiness that is caused by the act.
So, okay.
So if you
and
kidnap
determine
someone and they're basically a prisoner,
Hmm.
but you treat them well,
Yeah. Then some utilitarians would say, yeah, that's right. But just because their argument is so limiting in the fact that you just got to choose what makes you happy. Another issue is that when you're making a decision, you can't always foresee what the consequences are going to be. So an example that's used in...
I'm so sorry. It was him.
An example that's used in philosophy quite a lot is what we call the axe murder example. And this is basically, imagine you and a friend are at home and a guy comes to your door who is wielding an axe, and he asks to see your friend and whether he's in your house in order to kill him. In this situation, you're offered with the choice of either telling the axe murderer where your friend is,
Nice.
or lying. Now, in this example, all the consequences may not be seen. Let's say you do lie to save your friend, and meanwhile your friend jumps out the window and the axe murderer finds him anyway and kills him. You're not immediately aware of all the consequences, so you can't make a decision based on consequences that cannot be seen.
Yes, but all decisions are made. For example, most legal decisions are made with the idea that a problem is happening. To stop this problem continuing, we are prophesizing that this problem will continue, therefore we make a law to stop it. Most decisions are made with an idea of what is to come.
Yeah, an idea.
You don't know it for sure.
But you can't, with utilitarians, they base every single act
What's
on...
she doing? Right.
Every single act on consequences alone. They don't take into account the motive behind the consequences. So another example is, let's say you have a guy who's trying to poison a city's water source,
Nice.
and he puts chemical in, and turns out that this chemical actually cures cancer in the city.
Did you know that botulism H can actually kill about 1 billion people with a tiny minuscule amount? I'm just saying, continue.
Well, he accidentally cures cancer in the city. So he's produced happiness, and the consequences are he's produced a lot of happiness because people are cured of cancer. However, utilitarianism doesn't account for his motive behind his act, because many of us would say that's not a good motive. You know,
So no
he's
matter
tried
what
to-
the motive is, it's the end result. That's the
We've
most.
done
Yeah.
this before.
Yeah, we've mentioned this before in...
and this is
One of
what
the
these
other
people
episodes.
believe. So he'd be in the right for
The
doing
thing
so.
is, what it also doesn't take into
Yes.
account is that if you put this principle in practice constantly,
Hmm.
a sinister motive can produce sporadic results. You can't just. Let's say, how do we guarantee that happens again?
Mm.
How do we guarantee that with his motive, which is in our minds, immoral and sinister,
Mm.
and then it produces something that benefits the wider.
I mean, there are other theories, such as one proposed by Aristotle, and we'll talk about this in a later episode, but he doesn't go on a consequentialist-based theory. He goes more on what he calls agent-centered or self-centered. So rather than the act itself, it's more about the person that's doing the act.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
do these... if someone has a sinister motive but causes happiness, the consequence of their motive, whether it be good or evil,
Yeah.
is it believed that if it causes happiness, then it's fine?
Well, strict act utilitarianism means that is the case.
Right, okay.
Whereas you've got an alternative to this, which is raw utilitarianism, where you have to act to produce the most amount of happiness within rules of society. So if you're trying to poison a water source, you're not acting in the rules of society, so therefore that's not a good act.
Yeah.
So that does kind of take into account motives. However, if you are doing something that doesn't break laws or rules, but is still a nefarious motive, then you're still... It's the same thing, just on a smaller
does
scale.
being an agent of utilitarianism in the way that you encourage happiness, or you do something which encourages a greater amount of happiness, does that place you, by that theory, in the moral good? So it says, because Carl was touching on how the motive isn't morally good. So does utilitarianism prescribe the idea that if you do something which benefits a lot of people, you are in the moral good, or does it just merely state you're doing it?
Yes, however, a problem with that is in the past, let's say like a Roman Colosseum, for example, someone is getting killed, which benefits the audience. You know, people are happy that this Christian is being sacrificed to a lion. The reason why many people wouldn't say that this is a good thing is because times have changed, and act utilitarianism doesn't really fit in today's norms.
Is someone's life worth the happiness of like the audience though? Like there's the idea of utilitarianism that you want to create the most happiness, but you can create happiness without killing them.
Well, people like Mill would say no, because killing someone is a lower pleasure, you know? Like, if you're producing this sort of pleasure, it's not worth morality. It doesn't...
What if you kill them in an intellectual fashion?
What?
Like,
Make him do a really,
like,
really
flat out
difficult
stuff.
Sudoku, so he like blows his brains out.
Try to persuade them
no.
we're all made of
Do
stars.
that.
Well, a bigger underlying problem is proposed by Nozick, who says, well, is happiness even desired by everyone? He proposes this thing called a pleasure machine. And this pleasure machine, basically, if you were to use it,
Right.
then it would teleport you to a world where everything is good and everything produces happiness. And nothing you do can result in bad. It can be less good, but it's still good. Like, for example, if you get a B in a test, you know, it's good, but it's not top. So bad things still kind of happen.
Kill himself.
But it's still mostly good. And many people would say, well, I don't want to live there. You know, you have no way of failing.
Yeah, but then surely the idea of in that situation, the idea of pleasure and the idea of enjoyment become irrelevant, because if something's always pleasurable, pleasurable, we use the term pleasurable to differentiate between situations. So we say this situation is pleasurable, this situation isn't. If everything's pleasurable all the time, can you no?
My God.
That's what I mean.
We'll have to listen to this
The
whole
term
thing.
pleasurable would become irrelevant because no one would know anything
But
about
if it's just the feeling of pleasure always, then it's the feeling of pleasure always. Because like
Yeah,
it's
but
hard to
there's-
imagine because
There is
feel
still
pleasure
differences in
contrast
the
to,
level
like,
of pleasures, so you're
negative
still going to feel
feelings.
pleasure.
But the term pleasure as a blanket term would not apply. We would have a different. I think we'd have a different.
Yeah,
lexicon
it would
and linguistic
be.
code to cover that. Because
Yeah.
the only reason we use it is to differentiate between two different
But you
situations.
can never get bored of it or be unhappy with it because you're always feeling.
But you
pleasure.
don't know what unhappiness is. The
Let's
term
say-
itself is alien
That's
to
not
you.
bad.
Let's say, for
Yeah, it's not.
example,
But I'm saying the fact remains because of that.
let's say
the
for
question becomes slightly irrelevant.
let's say for example you did feel pleasure all the time and you felt happy in this world all the time. There would be no failure. There'd be no striving towards something that you want because you're given it.
But what's the problem with that? If you're always happy, then you're always happy.
And
Then
even
you
then
would
the
strive for
failure.
things
But
to
many
be
people
happy
would say
anyway.
that they don't want that.
But that's.
Why would you never want the
But
thing
even
that
then, the
you're always
idea of
striving
failure
for?
becomes an abstract concept. It doesn't actually become reality.
Basically, people don't want happiness forever because it doesn't work.
But if it could work, then why would you not want it to?
It doesn't.
Yeah.
But
Let's
it
just
does
say
in this
it
theory.
doesn't. Let's say
Let's
it doesn't.
hypothesise that it doesn't
Let's
work.
say
I thought
it's
you
a
were in this
machine.
world that it did.
No, I accidentally made that
The
rule.
does
machine's
work.
a bit messed up then, isn't it?
Let's just say it
Shitty
produces happiness. Well, things that make you happy, and let's say you may become desensitized to this happiness. It's still not a good
Okay.
thing, is it?
No, then sure.
Yeah. So, by Nozick, he says that, well, happiness may not be the highest goal for humans.
What would be then?
Well,
It's the journey.
there is another form of utilitarianism called preference utilitarianism.
Yeah.
That's saying that rather than happiness is instead the preferences of the people. So you should act in accordance to the preferences of the greatest number of greats.
Right.
Greats.
But surely, I fail to see the logic behind the idea that people wouldn't want happiness. I don't understand that. Because you're at the eventual goal.
I've explained it before and I can't remember. I've
But
done it so
the
long
eventual
ago.
the eventual goal of all suffering is to maintain
Well,
happiness.
The thing with
Or is to
preference
achieve happiness.
utilitarianism is that they say that happiness may not be the only goal.
It may not be the only goal, but
It
that's
is
not
a
that-
goal
Yeah.
for humans. That's why preference, you're meeting the preferences of people, which could make them happy, could make them satisfied, could
Can't
make
be
them
the-
comfortable.
It can't be the only goal because then when you get it, you end up losing it
Yeah.
just because of the fact. Like think of people who have everything, like people who've become like overnight billionaires or whatever.
They're
Like
not
they
happy.
get horrific like depression and
Mm.
stuff because of the fact that there's nothing they can do to try and achieve happiness anymore. There's nothing stopping
Yeah.
them from being
I think-
happy other than their
I
own
think
minds.
the term happiness is slightly misleading in the sense that there are different nuances to happiness. There's financial happiness, there's mental happiness. There's a lot of versions of that. If you
Mm.
had all of the various happiness, if you had every single one, mental stability, family happiness, all of that, I don't think anyone would not want that.
But I don't think you can have everything.
But
I don't
in,
think you
in
can
this
have
world,
everything.
in this world, hypothetically, Jones
Yeah.
opposing you
Yeah,
could.
yeah.
Well, that's why Aristotle proposes like eudaimonia rather than just pure happiness,
Mm.
because like the idea of eudaimonia is flourishing and just being generally good in life rather than just being happy.
Yeah.
Because happiness as a single goal just isn't achievable because there's always something that ruins it,
Mm.
or there's always something that interrupts it, or you just end up desensitized to the sensation of happiness in itself because it becomes such a norm.
Yeah, but then
Yeah.
if it's
I like that.
if it's desensitized to become a norm in the first place, then again the idea of happiness becomes irrelevant, and the idea of sadness becomes irrelevant. You just are. You're just
Yeah,
existing in a state of
It's
happiness.
paradoxical in a sense.
Yeah,
That's why.
because terms are invented to explain different emotions.
If
Again,
you're constantly experiencing one, you just kind of become numb to it, and then it's a paradox because happiness doesn't really exist in a world where sadness can't exist either.
No, because you're always in a state of happiness. Yeah, I agree, absolutely. Yeah.
That's why Aristotle proposes eudaimonia.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the idea of
Don't.
struggle and the idea of challenge, I think they are essentially human ideas. What you?
He's trying to smash
Sorry,
an
carry
apple,
on.
I think they're essentially human ideas, the ideas of struggle and things like that. And
However, a problem with Aristotle is that it's very circular. Basically, he says a good act is something done by virtuous people. Who are virtuous people? Ones that reach eudaimonia. How do you reach eudaimonia? By doing virtuous acts. It's just a big circle. So there are problems with Aristotle's argument, but it makes sense.
And
More sense than
righteous acts aren't always carried about righteous people.
No.
You can have a complete scumbag who hears a child crying in a room and goes in to save her from a fire, and then he can go home and watch child pornography.
No, he still says
He's not a righteous
he
person.
still says Aristotle basically says that good acts, in order to be and reach eudaimonia, you need to do a lot of good acts, and that's why his theory is agent-centered rather than act-centered. So you could have the one-off where a really bad person does a good act. That doesn't make him eudaimonic, or virtuous. That just makes him a guy that's done a good thing.
He needs to do multiple good things and be a good person.
Yeah, he needs to be a
inside.
balanced person, and that's where the doctrine of the meme comes in, where basically, in order to be a balanced person, you must do the mean thing. So, if there is a fire, you don't want to be rash and run in and try and save everyone because you're putting your life at danger and you're being a bit stupid, and you don't want to be a coward and run away. Instead, you've got to do the mean thing, which is probably called 999. So he
And then
feels
by doing that, you
yeah.
would be carrying out a righteous act.
yeah.
But the only way to flourish and reach ammonia and become virtuous in itself is to continually do those things throughout your life and try and remain like within the mean.
Yeah.
It's the idea that like you have to repeatedly attempt to be a good person and wish to be a good person to be one in the first place. You can't just do a good thing and go, oh, I'm good now.
So wishing you're a good person inevitably, and doing things which you perceive to be good acts, or at least keep within the mean, because of course this is all filtered through one's perception. You will become righteous by your own reckoning.
Yeah, by your own reckoning. There's also the idea that you have to be recognised as like by everyone else as a righteous person.
Does anyone say
That's not
anything?
international. That's not international at all.
Does anyone
Oh,
say anything?
it
like,
is-
Like,
it is
good
susceptible.
subjective to culture.
Yeah, it's culturally relative.
Is that something he outlines? That this is not a universal
It is an
thing?
issue with his argument. However, you could probably apply it to different cultures. You could just... as long as the
war then
culture
becomes
follows it.
really confusing, because then someone who shoots someone else for a good cause they see, on the other side that's seen as an evil cause.
That's where competing means comes in, where basically, like the axe murder, for example, do you lie or do you be honest? Like, do you lie or be honest, or get your friend killed? Like, it's justice or lying. And
But you're lying to pursue a righteous aim.
it's difficult because he doesn't provide a hierarchy of what is good, because you can't, because it's culturally relative.
is there any
So-
like?
Is it situationally relative as well? So it's in
Yes.
the idea that because
Well,
in that
it's
situation,
more-
lying
it's-
is probably the most righteous act.
Yeah.
I don't know if Aristotle's argument is very situational.
There was the,
It's more...
There was the scenario that I'm not sure if it was Aristotle himself that gave it, but there was a scenario that if you're put into a warlike situation where you have to lie to preserve the life of your family, post-war, your lies would have done more good than they would have bad, despite being like dishonest, because you preserved.
Oh, is that like
lives.
state of nature?
Yeah, I
Or
think
is that
so.
can? But yeah, he basically says, as long as you're striving towards peace and a civilized state rather than a state of nature, then you're doing a good act.
James.
I
There's
think
always going to be problems with morality
with quite
arguments.
a few of these, and whenever morality is mentioned, it's because morality is so subjective. Because the idea, or even civilization, there's different ideas of what civilization entails. There's different for example, we may say, oh, Western civilization is the epitome. It's not, but it's the epitome of democracy and etc. etc. But then you go into the Middle East or China, we're living in sin, and that's what I mean. There's different ways, and there's no such thing as universal righteousness.
I don't think that's what Aristotle is proposing, that everyone is universally righteous. I think it's more...
But he says there's ways of attaining universal righteousness in a way
He
because
doesn't.
you have to recognise it.
He says that within the context that you're in, you can be a balanced person. It's not so much he's trying to prescribe things to people. He's letting them decide what the most balanced thing is in that situation, and whether that is impacted by their culture, then so
Who
be
is
it.
the judge of righteousness?
Dunno.
Because if it's just yourself, then that means I.
No, but it's also the people around you within your community, and it's
And where did they learn that from?
from more people in their community, from eudaimonic people. That's what he says. He says you just ask eudaimonic people.
See, because when studying philosophy, generally the issue that comes into question is pretty much every time that morality is subjective to culture and very relative depending on the person. It tends to be a repetitive issue throughout.
And
There's
that
not
just
really any way.
is how it is. Like
Yeah.
you can't say, well, this doesn't apply to everyone, because it doesn't.
Yeah, but then even though you're saying that theory, that hypothesis, it is weakened by that.
Yeah, of
It's taken
course,
into
and
account
that's
for
why
different perceptions.
all theories of morality are weakened, because they're trying to define morality, whereas
Which is impossible.
the way different cultures have arisen, and the way we are creating laws and creating rules and expectations is very different depending on where you've grown up.
Yeah, it is.
So, yeah. And also going back to preference utilitarianism, obviously if you're trying to fulfill someone's preference, what if their preference is, I like killing people, then, that's a bad thing. That's just
Yeah,
a
but
bad
surely
bad
isn't
thing.
preference the idea that you look at the majority preference?
Yeah.
So you look at that one idiot that says I like killing people. He's not the majority. At least we can hope so. And again, that's
Why?
imposed by culture.
Why?
Well, he's not the majority. There's one
Let's-
person.
No,
let's
why,
say-
why do we hope that he's not a majority?
Because I've been brought up in Western values by which we were taught not to kill. However, there is there's proof in terms of evolutionary biology, because animals exhibit similar behaviours when they're in pack environments, that killing another member of your species, killing another member who could later aid you, or you could have a relationship with, is not in favour of survival. So there's evidence for universal disgust for
But that doesn't
killing
work
members of
in
your own
every
community.
situation. Let's say you're in a room and trying to think of an example. Let's say you kill someone in that room, and everyone in the room is like sadistic.
Yeah, there's the
Idiot.
scenario. There's like a theoretical scenario where you're in a room full of people, and it turns out, like, unbeknownst to you, that you're within a group of people who are majorly sadistic and take pleasure from killing, and you happen to kill one member because you realise that it would cause the greatest number of pleasure for everybody else, because every other person.
Right. So, what if someone's preference? They choose to do the right thing, so the morally righteous things. Yes, they choose. But their preference is to do that just so they can look like they're a good person. They're not actually choosing to do the right thing because they think it's the right thing to do. They're doing it to take on the image of being a good person when really they're not.
Yeah, but is the pursuit of that image in itself quite a righteous act? Sorry, continue.
Kant says that you can't do a morally good act if you are in it for a reward, or if you're in it to look like a good person.
Yeah, right. That's
You need to do it through duty.
It needs to be a
His is a
genuine thing to do. You want to
So
do the right thing.
You're going to say this person.
Duty is reward, because if you're doing your duty...
Oh yeah, no, it still is a reward, but he thinks there are specific rewards like monetary or like fame stuff like that shouldn't be your motive. If you do get a reward, then that's pretty cool, but you shouldn't do it because you want a reward. So as long as you're doing it out
for
of
the
duty.
sake of
But the
being
thing,
good.
the thing is, surely you know the feeling you get when you do something good.
Yeah.
You get a feeling. You
Serotonin.
get a feeling of pride and etc.
No, melatonin.
Yeah, it doesn't. But anyway.
Oh yeah, serotonin is when you.
But surely the feeling of being selfless, and that feeling you get of doing a good thing, that in itself is pursuit of a selfish thing because you want that.
Yeah, but
good,
he
you
would
want that
he would argue
reward.
that is a humane response. You know, as you do it, you're going to get that good feeling. Because that's how we react to good things, and he would say that isn't a morally bad thing to do. But if you're in it for a monetary reward or a fame reward or blah 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 blah, then that's a bad thing because your motive isn't duty.
So how is he defining duty? We're saying patriotic duty.
We're
We're saying duty to one's kin and oneself.
Yeah,
Can't remember how he
can
defines it.
encompass a lot
And it
of
can
things.
encompass a lot of quite selfish acts. So duty, for example,
He
in
defines
war,
duty as
for
not.
national days.
Is it autonomy and how it shouldn't impact people's autonomy, or is that something else? That's still Kant, yeah. Kant's duty-based theory. I can't remember how he defines duty.
Because
I was really only supposed to talk about utilitarianism.
Yeah,
today,
we've
but
gone into
we've gone all of them.
Kantian ethics.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I saw you, Kant.
That's it. This is the hardest one as well. I don't know how he defines duty, and to be fair, Kant's theory does fail quite badly. So
Kant's theory is a terrible theory.
I hate it. My favourite out of the three is Aristotle, and then there are non-cognitivist theories which make more sense because they're less sort of these are rules. They rather allow for culturally relative ideas. So I thought as like a final thing, we could talk about some like problems that you may have heard of. So have you heard of the trolley problem?
The trolley problem.
Or the tram problem?
Yeah, if you don't have
Oh,
a pound coin
yeah.
to put in it, then
Yeah.
you've got to try and find something pound
Hit
coin.
us.
Is it like when the people are laying on the tracks?
Well, not laying, just working.
Tied to
It could be playing.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know.
tied to the track.
Okay, why not? There's like
That's actually a point. Would you say, right, if there's 5 people working on tracks, right, and the train's going towards them, but then there's one person, but they're tied to the tracks, which one would you save?
This
I
is
don't
the
know.
same thing.
You just
but a
shout at
worse
the workers
version of it.
and then cut
no,
out the
because
person.
the problem is that during this they've got like protective earwear and you can't just yell at them.
Yeah.
Like that would get around the problem
And
entirely.
the actual thing is that there's like one person on a track and then there's 5 on the main track and you have to flip a switch to make the train go.
I
near the
personally
one
wouldn't
person.
flip the
Would
switch.
you do
I feel
it?
like in that situation I would freeze. However,
need-
it makes more sense to flip the switch because you're saving 5 people.
Can-
Beth's coming.
That's
Yay.
genuine.
Some normality.
Hello,
Beth, please
Carl,
save me.
I'm amazed you came down.
Please, there's so much editing for this episode.
you deserve to burn in hell.
We're still recording. What is it? Recording. Right.
Just watch this in peace.
I like those.
Excuse me.
Drop it.
Turn it off.
No, turn it off. Let James do his
Turn
thing.
it off.
Right.
So how would you? So you got the trolley problem, but you've also got like a problem of scapegoats. If you had an angry mob and they wanted the murderer to be caught and killed, and you as the government are like, oh crap, we don't know who the murderer is, so you just get some random old idiot who has no family or friends and kill him and say that he was the murderer just to satisfy the crowd so that they don't cause a riot, is that a good thing?
No.
That's
Simple.
Utilitarians.
What's your thoughts? Because you're the nuance king. Come on.
I'm a king.
Wait, repeat that once.
Repetition.
The whole thing.
Just repeat that once. Yeah.
If there's a crowd,
Could you
to kill
initiate
someone
repetition for
random
me?
to make them think that the murderer is dead.
I would like to-
Basically, it's appeasing a crowd.
Well, it depends. It depends on the circumstance. Because, for example, if the crowd is so rowdy that there is many people who may
They're a
be
mob.
trampled or
Yeah.
such anything like that lines. For example, you could look at Hillsborough. If you had that kind of scale of crowd and that kind of risk to life, and killing one person will temporarily satiate that crowd, then yes, I would say that's a reasonable response.
Sanchez.
If it, what gives you the right to kill another person who's
Yeah.
innocent of this?
Well, I'm talking about a utilitarian idea. I'm not saying I personally agree. I'm just pointing out a nuance.
What's to say that the murderer isn't a serial killer and kill a lot more people than that's in the crowd? So therefore, it doesn't create.
Yes,
this
but
amount of
if,
happiness.
for example, if it's the only way of satiating the crowd, and otherwise you just allow the crowd to rampage
Could always
without
do
being
it.
stopped, then more people will die or become injured. So therefore, killing one, if that serves a purpose, then from a utilitarian sense, fine.
From a utilitarian sense, yes.
Yes.
But from every other sense, probably not. Imagine you're a doctor and you have 5 patients who all need different organs, and you find a man who is a match for all of these people, and this man has no family or friends and is a bit of a loner.
Yeah.
Do you kill him and steal his 5 organs?
Sorry.
Do you,
I would say probably not.
yeah, okay.
I'm
Who just punched a carrot?
What the hell is wrong with me? Is this
And
What an
it?
innocent carrot.
How dare you?
I'll fix it.
Pick that up.
I'm going to carrot my work.
Got it straight up my shirt.
Good.
Thanks for listening to episode 13. Please send help.
What are you doing over there? Don't you dare.
Goodbye. It's episode 13. Goodbye. Have fun. Watch us on YouTube. Email us at thephilosophod@gmail.com. Goodbye.